Well, thank you, and welcome to Implementing IT Service Management, a guide for success. If you notice that I spend a lot of time just collecting these acronyms, people give me a hard time about it that, hey, you know what? Your acronyms and all the things that you've accomplished is longer than your name. So I get a lot of grief by a lot of people about this. So what are the learning objectives today? I want to make sure that when you walk out of this room and you get on with your day and into your day job, that you could identify, implementation frameworks to support your IT service management project. I want to make sure that you're able to and have the ability to plan your next ITSM process improvement project and select ways to socialize the ITSM value to your stakeholders. More importantly, it's like the learning outcome will really be assessed through your next successful project at your job. But if this was truly, a true classroom setting, then I'll give you a test, and I would expect you to pass that test and give you some questions on that. So by a show of hands, how many people are ITIL V3 certified professionals? Okay, so we have a few in the room. How about ITIL expert certified professionals? Whoa, we have one person who's an expert in the room. So what is ITIL? What is this information technology infrastructure library all about? Well, really what it is a de facto standard, set of standards and processes based on life cycles and processes to really meet the needs of our business stakeholders. It's the ABCs of IT service operations and its management. It gives you the ability to plan, to design, to implement, to operationalize, and really support IT service management and its operations on a continual basis. So what I see here in this diagram, in this model, is, for me, I see it as a hurricane, right? Lots of stuff going on. You start with service strategy as you establish your strategy for how you're going to really implement IT operations. You look at the design of how you're going to design those processes, how you're going to transition them and make them operational, and really look at the service operations. Once you put them in play, how are you going to measure and make sure that they're valuable and continually improving the process? So what I'll tell you today, that some people would say ITIL is running IT operations as a business. And just think about that people are actually thinking that IT is some separate entity that lives outside of your organization. My opinion is that ITIL really just enables the ability for IT operations to serve the needs of the business, because IT really is a business enabler. It is not a separate function. And most IT people would walk around and believe that they run the business because IT is the main core thing. This key to let you know that ITIL itself has 5 life cycle phases that you saw in the previous diagram in terms of its strategy, its design, transition, operation, and continual service improvement. And for each one of these life cycle phases, you have a series of service processes. What I'll let you know today that our focus will not be on the specific processes for ITIL or ITSM. What we're here to learn about is how do we really implement IT service management, right? Because any one of us could go out and buy a book and read about these processes. They're very well documented, and ITIL has been around for 20 plus years. So you could go out and learn that. One of the things that I've discovered is that when I go to most conferences, I never walk away with, how do I implement this? And this is the point of this presentation today. So implementing ITSM is a change management initiative. Anyone disagree with that? That we're changing the scope of what we're doing within our organization? So you can look at the first definition, that it's really delivering a stated goal on time, on budget, and a sustainable benefit to the organization. It kind of sounds like another principle that I'm familiar with. Anyone could tell me what that principle is? On time, on budget. Project management, right? It's even the iron triangle as well. So change management itself has those stated principles. It's also looking at the transformation of the organization from some current state, there's some organizational, to a future state so that you could be more effective. In order for IT, the focus of ITSM as a change management principle is that we have to make sure that we balance things out. Because, generally what happens is that an IT person is assigned a task of delivering IT service management as a process improvement activity in the organization. And so we're way skewed over here thinking of technology and how that works. But you got to remember, there are people, there's a culture, right? There's new processes that you implement. And last but not least, if you notice, this technology is the fourth thing that we consider in this process. We have to balance it out so that we look at not only just technology, but we also look at what's going on with the business operation. What is its impact? As part of that is really building a cross-functional team. Because you can't do this by just running it with IT only. You're going to need other people from the organizations. You're going to need project managers to help you put this process in place, right? You're going to need people from the business to make that happen. Now, if change management is not your core competency, I could guarantee you could find someone in your organization to help you do that. And generally, I always go to my OD team, organizational development, and said, hey, can you help me? Can you help me move this process through? So I'm starting to build collaboration. Now, in order for you to really implement this effectively, these are common practices. If you think of just running a business in general, you're going to have to create some vision, right? And make sure you communicate that early and often. And I think if you're making any type of change in your organization, this is one common principle that you will adapt. And make a commitment to the plan that you're putting in place. We know that without a plan, you can't get things done. And you've heard the old adage, right? Set up a plan and work that plan. Make sure that you can establish a plan and work that plan to the very end. And business culture is very important. You got to understand business culture and how that really works. Because I tell you this, there are people in your organization who are the naysayers. And they will just take your process all the way down to the failure line. And before you know it, how did I get here? Well, you weren't paying attention to what's going on in the culture in your organization. And you weren't trying to build that great synergy and relationship with those individuals who said, no, that's not going to work. Here's IT again, coming in, bringing new processes, which will not add value to our business. Hey, we've heard that before. This is not going to work. So be aware of the resistance. And be adaptable, be flexible, change your plan as needed. So the way I'm going to really talk about implementing ITSM, I will provide you a business scenario. And we'll take that business scenario and wrap a process around that business scenario. And then we'll use a framework that will take you through the process. If you've done any other type of certification like PMP or BABAC, for being a business analyst, you will see some frameworks that may be similar. So think of this, that here's this organization. In 2009, they bought a series of Microsoft licenses. Now, at the end of the year, you have to do a true-up to verify. I said I was going to use 1,000 licenses at the end of the year. Well, where are you? So now the first year in 2009, it was $500,000. In 2010, it's $1.5 million. In 2011, it's $2 million annually that they have to pay additionally in terms of what the licenses that they were really established for. So you could imagine what would happen in your organization, right? If you had that cost going in that direction, in terms of the CFO and the CIO would be on your butt, making sure, go fix this, get this done right. So can anyone really tell me what's really going on with this organization? What are some of the factors or things that you may think that's happening with this organization, why they're in this position where their price, their financial risk is going this way.
Headcount increases?
Pardon?
Headcount increase?
Headcount increase would be one factor that would drive that.
Poor planning.
Poor planning.
They don't know what licenses they have, and they don't know what licenses they need.
Exactly. So you can see that one thing I could tell you that there's a lack of process control. That's one aspect, right? Which would give you exactly understanding what was acquired and what was distributed or deployed and what was retired at some point in time. And there's no risk mitigation involved in this, right? Because if you're managing your risk as you go through this process, you would identify that, wow, it went from $500,000 to 1.5, like, wow, that's huge growth in terms of cost. And so you could see that no one is really minding the store in this scenario, right? And this is something that has happened in the real world from my consulting experience, that I walked into an organization and this was happening. So we will use a process called software asset management. Anyone heard of SAM before? Sam, I am, who eat green eggs and ham, I won't eat it in the boat. You know that. So let me tell you what SAM is about. Software asset management itself it's really all the infrastructure and processes necessary to really manage your software asset. End to end, its life cycle. It's one of those things that's really important to the CIO and CFO, and I guarantee most organizations very rarely ever talk about SAM. We have incident management, problem management, configuration management, but software asset management, not really. And the reason I chose this process is because if you're not involved in IT, you could understand this. It's simple enough. It's not one of the 26 ITSM processes. It's not even in the top 10. And ITIL itself, the organization, maps this through the software asset and configuration management process. That's how it comes into that whole region. So its focus is on cost avoidance and risk mitigation. As you know, software lives everywhere, right? You have them on your desktop and your mobile devices. Just imagine what's going to happen when you get into things like bring your own device to work. And that's happening in some organizations already, where you may have to start deploying software owned by your organization onto my iPhone. What happens when this goes into the cloud, right? You still have, so you could see, you have to, at least at some point, start putting some controls in place to manage from the acquisition of whatever software you have with your vendor to when you retire that software and the license is no longer used. You need buy-in to get this process done. And if you could see, in terms of a cross-functional team, you have finance, you have strategic sourcing, accounts payable, all of the IT tiers of people working on desktops, and also your third-party vendors, because you're going to be buying this software from someone, or you may even go through a distribution channel to purchase that software for you. So here's this framework. This is a framework that I kind of use at work, but I've modified it significantly so that I don't infringe on trademark secrets. In here, as part of this model framework, we will have like 4 phases. So we will evaluate the organization to understand exactly where are we today. What is the current process flow and how does that really work? We'll conduct some interviews and workshops with our business leaders and also our IT folks. We'll do some gap analysis. Let's look at the current state versus the future state, right? And look at ITIL best practices and see how they map together. And we want to evaluate where the organization is from a maturity perspective. So as a deliverable out of this phase is there's some gap analysis. There's some life cycle processes and organization and governance structure. The same thing happens with strategize, where we really want to look at where we want to be in the future. How are we going to apply the variance that we're found with our organization, what the industry is doing, and really bring that into our organization so we can be successful. Out of that come a future state strategy roadmap, total cost of ownership, and an executive summary. And as you can see, on and on, we go to orchestrate. We're designing the solution and deliver, bringing that solution into play. So this is one delivery framework. So if we were doing PMI, can anyone tell me the 5 different phases of PMI? I know there's some PMP in this room. I see them. Mike?
Initiation, planning, execution, monitoring, and control of flow.
Yeah, you could see that you could take those same 5 principles from the PMBOK and really apply that here and use the activities and deliverables, and you'll still be in familiar territory, right? Because we still have to produce some of the other artifacts as a project manager. A project manager will have to. You got to have your schedules and risk mitigation strategies and all of those wonderful things. So the first phase, which is to evaluate, is you're going to have participants from, you're going to have a project manager, you're going to have a project consultant, you're going to have the executives involved, and you're going to have your management team. So when you guys walked in, at least some of you, when you walked in the room today, what I did was gave you a piece of paper. So I will call out the label on top of those little boxes, and I'll ask you to read them. And the reason is, the first thing that you want to do for your evaluate process is conduct an interview, right? We're going to have some strategic questions and work with members of our organization to really understand what's going on. Because really, you may or may not know, and you won't know all the details of the answers. So, survey, if you could find a little slip of paper, and if you have survey question 1, would you read that, please?
Can you identify the key stakeholders impacted by this change?
And if that question was pointed to me, I would say, of course, the people that needs to be involved in this is that we have to make sure our finance team is involved. And we have to get procurement, because we're doing software asset management. We want to make sure our IT people are engaged as just 3 different key stakeholders as part of this process. We'll also talk about our external vendors, that they are also critical stakeholders in this. Now, survey question number 2. Someone has survey question number 2? Please read, please.
What are the specific strategic goals that you are want to accomplish by implementing the process?
Well, the strategic goal is that we want to reduce costs. We want to reduce risk. Right now, our price is escalating from $500,000 over to $2 million annually. One of my strategic goals is to make sure we get that down to 0. And we want to do that within a 1-year period. Survey question number 3. Go ahead.
Oh, mine's procurement.
Please describe the roadmap and any planning that is currently underway.
Well, at this time, we don't have a roadmap, and we have no planning in place. This is why we're failing so terribly in terms of our cost. So, and same thing for survey question number 4.
Hey Dave, what do you consider key opportunities and challenges?
Well, as you could see, risk mitigation is one of my biggest challenges. One of the great opportunities is that we have the ability, we have an option to now put into place some processes that allows us to control how we acquire software, all the way until we retire software. We will know end to end through the life cycle how things work, and actually put the appropriate solutions in place to help that. Survey question number 5.
How do you plan on to address challenges and constraints?
At this time, I don't know. I will really reach out to the team and ask them for help to ensure that we could do a much better job of managing our constraints. We'll put a risk mitigation process in place so we could identify that. But this is part of your implementation strategy. When you go to evaluate, you've set up a series of questions that you go in and you meet with these individuals, the various stakeholders, and you ask them these questions. You don't send out a survey, but you have a sit-down interview so you could capture that information and really gather that information. So from a strategic perspective, beyond that, also is that if this was incident, I would be talking about incident practices as opposed to SAM. Right? And if there was another process that I was looking to implement, I would use that in place of SAM. So right now we're talking about software asset management, so we're talking about SAM technologies. We know that our procurement and contract management team is a part of this process. So we want to evaluate those guys and have interviews with them as well. Your financial team, you want to understand how their process works as it fits in for doing software asset management. ERP systems, right? You're going to have, if you have your financial team, you know you're going to have some type of, whether it's PeopleSoft or some other product that you will be using to help with your ERP process. And finally, it's really, do you have any other ITSM processes that you've already implemented within the organization, right? And you want to take a look at that. Now, after you've gone through the whole process of interviewing, looking at artifacts, right? You're really trying to understand the organization. Now you're going to come back and say, well, this is what ITIL tells me that I have to do to implement software asset management. It said, here's the best practices. It says I have to have some overall management processes so that I could really manage and govern what goes on within the organization when it deals with software. I have to also have some critical software asset processes that deals with what is the life cycle? How does this really work? And as you implement software or you disperse it through the organization, from the time that someone says, I need 1,000 licenses of Microsoft Office, what does that really look like? How do we go through and define that and make sure that we can procure it and deploy it, right? And do optimization, because if I buy 1,000 licenses and all of a sudden I'm up to 1,200 people, if I didn't negotiate for those additional 200 licenses, I'm in trouble, right? And if my company is growing faster and people are leaving and I'm not tracking all the way through the life cycle, then I'm going to have a lot of problems at the end of the year. And there are a lot of, trust me, there's lots and lots of companies out there who have these scenarios. And finally, you have to verify, audit what's going on within the organization. So after you've reviewed all of these documents, you've gone through and mapped against your process, let's see how mature our organization is. I borrowed a model from Microsoft and KPMG, and it's their SAM maturity optimization model. I like this model because it was really simple and it was really easy for the business people to really understand it. I've seen others where a maturity level 1 or 2 or 3, what does that really mean? And the description was very cryptic. So I used something, and this is a model that I've actually used at a customer to really walk them through, where are you? So the very first level is that it's basic, it's ad hoc. You have little or no control over what's going on in your organization from an IT perspective, especially specifically software. No policies, no procedures, right? Poor resources, poor tools. And you can see the migration where you go up to standardized, where most organization fits here in the standardized level, where they do have some processes and they have some tools, right? And they have some repository, even if that repository is Microsoft Excel, right? It's still a repository and it's still something that you could go to, and as you progress through the process, where you want to get to is really being really dynamic, where, you know, SAM is really like an asset to the organization, right? From your strategic perspective, because now I can plan and look at how my organization is growing, right? And really account for that and manage the financial risk associated with that. So besides just having a maturity model, one thing that you have to really focus on is make it purposeful. What does it really mean to be dynamic? All right, what does it really mean to be a maturity level 4? What does this really mean? I'm saying, for example, that, hey, you know, when I'm dynamic, I'm delivering $2 million in annual savings to the organization. What kind of business person get with that? What do you think? Sure, they could connect to that information. And as IT people, we kind of like to keep all the good news as secrets. We don't tell anyone about it, right? We don't tell anyone. Yes. So I said, socialize, you know, this great news to the organization. Work with members from your marketing team. They will be happy to come in and put up a big sign and banners that, hey, we're dynamic, we're saving $2 million annually. Great news, right? These are things that we can do to socialize this part of our organization, what maturity really means for us. Now, finally, we're going to do a gap analysis, right? So we did some interviews, so we understand where things are. We reviewed some artifacts. We looked at our maturity level, and now we mapped that against the industry best practices. Now we have to say, well, what are the gaps? What has happened in our organization, or what is happening in our organization that's really prohibiting us from being dynamic? So I picked a few things that I've ran into, over my career as a consultant. Is that, so as you set up this gap analysis, you have, an idea gap. What's the impact of the organization? How are you going to remediate that? And level of effort. There's nothing like walking into an executive and said, X is wrong. Well, what does this impact? Well, how are you going to fix it? How long does it take? All of these questions. How much does it cost? Part of this process is to make sure that you have clear, succinct information to the executives that you're speaking to. So, lack of executive sponsorship is one thing. And that happens where sometimes we start some of these processes as a grassroots activity, and no one on the top knows about it or cares about it. So this is giving you a way of how to communicate that back to the organization, to say that the impact is that no one knows what the strategy is. What are we doing? And to ensure that we mitigate or remediate this gap is that we want to make sure that we find someone who could really connect across in a cross-functional way. I would say it's going to take us 1.5 months, a month and a half. And the other one is just unidentified governance and accountability. I said 2 months, but I'm dreaming. That's more like 6+ months to really make that work, right? I just put that in there for humor. Now, we'll get off and we'll start to strategize. So we evaluated what was going on with the organization. Now we need to go to the next level of where we're building our strategy of how we will implement these processes in the organization. So there are a bunch of key components that you look at. What are the objectives? For me, I said I want to increase control over what's going on with our software. We want to have a scope. How much work are we going to do? And what does it really mean? In terms of governance, how are we going to set up the rules and policies, and who are the leaders who are going to help us build this vision and roadmap to move this forward? And how are we going to integrate our people into this process? What are the processes and what are they going to look like? And so basically you're laying out high-level descriptions so your business people, because essentially once we get to strategize, the strategy is for the key business leaders, right? Because the next decision is to execute a project, to implement your new process. And where do you really want to be? What maturity level do you want to attain? Most people, trying to get to a dynamic level is not realistic. All right, so you may settle and say, you know what, we'll start with standardized, or maybe we are at standardized and our aspiration is one level up to be rationalized. But part of your strategy is also really laying out exactly what does this organization look like in order for us to implement software asset management. So if it was incident or any of the other ITSM processes, you would lay out and identify what the organization looked like. And one of the key things that I said that we have to have an executive sponsor, someone who will be the Pied Piper, who will walk into finance when you have issues and say, we're trying to achieve this objective. We've laid out what the scope is. We've identified what we're trying to achieve. Can you get on board with this? And so everyone clearly has a view and a vision of what this organization will look like to deliver this new process. All right? Because software asset management, its impact is across the organization. Milestones. So I told you what the scope was. And so now we want to identify where do we want to be within, and some of these processes really takes 6 months to about 9 months to implement. in reality. Sometimes it can go out to a year or longer, depending on where the organization is. Because if you're at basic, it's going to take you a lot longer to get up to the next level. So you'll do some planning. Make sure that in this case, I wanted to make sure that we had a leader selected, that we're able to assemble a team and really start to lay out the vision of where we want to go. This sounds very familiar, right? And if you're executing a business, you would pretty much lay out this kind of like the same thing. From a design perspective, you want to make sure that the processes that you want to implement are complete. You have to lay them out. Someone has to write them, right? Or even adapt them, because if you bought this off the shelf, these processes that for ITIL, someone has to adapt them into your organization and make sure that they work for you. There has to be some level of customization that takes place. Then you will build them. You would then deliver them for pilot testing. But behind the scenes, what's going on is that you do have existing contracts in place, right? You do have existing software in place. So there has to be some reconciliation and going forward looking at what's the inventory? What do we have? And really trying to reconcile that so that when you come forward to go live, all of that is taken care of here in this phase. And if you notice, this is through the whole planning stage, and even when we get to execution, that we're starting to look at this early, right? So that it doesn't wait until the very end, and you go, oops, oh, we can't go live because really we haven't reconciled our contracts with our vendors. We don't know what the inventory is. So basically, garbage in, garbage out, right? Now, when you get to the end of your strategized phase, now you want to build an executive summary. You want to know, it's like, hey, what are the gaps? Right? We know what the gaps are because I had a gap analysis. I told you exactly what the impacts are, how long it will take, who's impacted by it, how do we plan to remediate that process, what are the benefits of the new processes, what does it cost, how are we going to manage risk, and when will it pay for itself? Right? These are all critical elements because our conversation is not just with our IT people, our conversation is with our business partners. And since ITIL is supposed to run IT as a business, then we should be having a business conversation. And these are specific tools that would help you to get there. So now, your stakeholders love you, and they said, go forward and implement this process. Here's your budget. We see that you have your team. We love your vision. We love the fact that you have an idea of what problem you're trying to solve and how you plan to do it. We have everything in place that would allow an executive to say, I feel comfortable enough. I'll go orchestrate. We'll make this happen. So same phases of planning, design, build, deliver. But now since we're speaking specifically towards software asset management, a lot of the elements that I have here is specific to software asset management. So there were several processes that we talked about. The overall management processes that was up in the diagram, our core processes, our life cycles. If this was another process, an ITSM process, and I keep talking about incident because it seems to be one of the bigger ones that people adapt to, so we have to do this first. As part, even in the top 10, it's really like number 1 or 2 in the list of the ITSM processes that ITIL recommends that you implement. You will just replace those names with those core buckets of things, because these are all deliverables, right? And so if you, in your work breakdown structure, this would be, in my design phase, here are the several work products that we have here to deliver. And you would go through that through all 4 phases. Now, one of the key things that you'll have to do after you do your planning is workshops. Workshops are really cool because it really gives you an opportunity to really interactively learn from your team in a collaborative way. And some of you walked in here and I gave you a card. And so you would have things like business leader, procurement 1, or procurement 2, accounts payable, and desktop. So I'm going to simulate based on this process where we initiate an order, process an internal order, you initiate one for the external order, place that order, process the media for software, you're going to install it, right? There are going to be some invoices. And then you have to do a proof of license, right? So if I install it here on Van's machine, I want to make sure that I have Van's information. I know where he sits. You know, I know his kid's name. I know all sort of information about Van. So I know exactly where he is. So what we'll do is that I gave you some people who walked in the door a slip of paper. So if you have the business leader slip of paper, what we'll do is simulate what you would do in a workshop. Because what we do is get everyone in a room and we look at the process end to end and all the people who are involved, and you walk through that process. It's called a paper walkthrough. So who has the business leader piece of paper? Business leader? Please, ma'am.
I am in the service request system and placed an order for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And procurement 1.
I'm in the service request system and process an internal order for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And procurement 2.
I am the external vendor portal system, and I placed an internal order for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And procurement 4 or 3.
I am in the external vendor portal system and received an order for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And procurement 4.
I am in the software asset management system and updated the receipt of an order for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
Accounts payable. Accounts payable, anyone?
I am in the accounts payable system and processed an invoice for 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And desktop 1.
I'm in the sound system and installed 50 Microsoft Office licenses.
And desktop 2.
Proof of license updated in Sam's system.
So as you can see, we have selected several different roles, and what we're doing is role playing. All right, we don't have the systems in place because sometimes when you're putting in a brand new process, right, you don't have any systems to support what you're doing, right? So you will go through and lay out your process and really define what that looks like, and you would have the individuals who will perform those functional roles really speak through the actions, right? Which gives you, you know, the most amazing thing that I've seen is that sometimes you have two people working for the same organization, have never met each other, have no idea what the type of work that they perform on a daily basis, and there's a light bulb moment that goes off at that point in time. Because for the first time, everyone is in the same room, having the same conversation, and talking about the same process. We're focused. But even more important than that is that sometimes people take back the lessons learned from those paper walkthrough and organically integrate them into their processes. And you're going like, wow, it's not time yet. Well, yeah, but this is a low-hanging fruit. We could get this done now. And that's beautiful, to be able to run these workshops. And be mindful, workshops happen all through the phases. So as you evaluate, you'll have a workshop. As you strategize, you'll do the same, orchestrate. Even for delivery, you'll have a workshop where you're validating your process to ensure that it works. Because as you go through delivering this project, at the very end, you may have the system in-house, right? So now you have an opportunity to work through your paper workshop or your processes and bring that now into a system where within that system you could test, validate that this process really truly works, right? So one beautiful thing is that you end up with a beautiful diagram like this. And this is a PowerPoint diagram. So you have lots of errors all over the place, but if I wanted to walk you through this, I would say, well, you start here, and someone came in and made a request. We're still talking about software asset management because previously, you know, we had this high-level view that someone initiated, right? So most people who get to see this other spaghetti diagram, they already have a business context of how this works. I gave you a high-level diagram. I did a workshop. Everyone walked through the process. So this will be familiar. When they get here, it wouldn't be like sticker shock. You'll be like, oh, what is this? No, so there's a start, and we know that there was an initiation of an audit here in our service catalog. Now, if it was a new request, we'll go through the procurement process, and we'll have finance and HR involved. And that's part of our ERP system, right? Now, if it was an existing order, we have this asset management tool where we have a repository that the order starts and it initiates and says, well, you know, let's go out and go into our service catalog and look at, see what we have here. And basically, you'll start having that conversation that, yeah, there's a request, someone needs to install it, there's going to be some change that needs to take place, someone has to deploy it, all right? And eventually, then we end. So I could essentially walk someone through this process, and it would make sense to them because I took the time to go through and have it at a very high level from a business perspective, give you simple boxes that you could understand. Now here comes the real complicated part of it, where things are all interconnected and you have lines going everywhere and little narratives about what they are, what information is being delivered. So now after you've done that, now comes to the beautiful part of marketing and educating your team. We don't do that as IT people. Hey, we installed the system, it's done. Go work it. Yeah, what's the impact? We don't know. So we know we're terrible at that. So I said, reach out to your marketing team. Build a marketing campaign. You know, I was at one company where everywhere you went, and they were bringing ITIL in, they said, ITIL is here. And every time there's just messages all over the company that this is coming, everyone knew, and what is ITIL? Then people start looking into what it was. People start, you know, hey, we have some education. We can get trained in ITIL. Really? What is that? So no matter what level you are in the organization, they brought that training in-house so that people could be educated as to what ITIL is all about. And that's a key component for our organization. As leaders, as IT leaders as we are, it's really important for us to let people know that we're doing something great for them and make sure we give them an opportunity to be educated about it. And make it simple. Keep it simple. It doesn't have to be a very complicated effort. So now we have to deliver, which is the hard part. You know, you read all the statistics of how terrible IT is at delivering value to the organization, right? We have all the statistics. Most IT process management improvement projects fail 70% of the time. Couldn't do that in manufacturing. Couldn't do that if you were producing drugs, right? just think about the relevance. If you start comparing industries, you could not get away with that. But here we go back to what ITIL says. This is the industry best practices. So this is what you're going to deliver to the organization. And underneath this diagram, you would have documents that represent the processes that you will deliver. You will have training, right? You'll have systems that'll help to support how do you really go through and build some definition in terms of how do I bring 1,000 licenses of Microsoft into our organization and distribute it and really retire it. At some point you have to retire it, but one of the other things that happens is that if someone leaves our organization, we never ever reclaim that license. That's where it's another big dinger for me, right? We want to establish how we're going to measure our success. So we start by looking at what are the critical success factors for doing software asset management. So I'm just giving you a simple model that what will protect the organization from risky behaviors in terms of financial risk? What would increase our capability? And really, how do we really manage the cost across the board? So we set up critical success factors that you want to manage financial risk in the organization. And we said, you want to set up a performance level. If it's not important, give it a low. If it's in the middle, give it a medium, right? But to me, I said, here are 3 things that we want to look at to make sure that we are successful and we can measure against. So what's associated with a critical success factor is, and I'm sure we've heard of this, is KPIs, right? Key performance indicators. We don't have to roll out ITSM with 100 KPIs, right? It makes no sense. Look at what's relevant to the organization. I still like SMART. Most people say, SMART is is passe. I still like the premise of SMART, of things being specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. I still like that. Some people look at me, that's so 80s. And I'm still saying, like, you know, it so works, right? So I borrowed a few things from Gartner, and I said, and their view for some KPIs is, you know, for software asset management, let's have 3 big buckets. Let's talk about key cost indicator and how we're managing spending, and risk indicator, how we're managing our exposure. Because I'll tell you this much, one of the things that happens is that if you depend on a certain software and you're constantly over, you know, the next time you go to negotiate, you'll be negotiating at a higher rate, right? And you continue that process, all of a sudden you're paying street prices for your software. So how do I manage that exposure? And what is the quality of the data that I'm collecting and measuring so that I could really look at how much software do I have in inventory? How much did I buy? How much did I use? How much did I reclaim? How much did I retire? And as we live in a global world, it becomes even more and more complicated. And I was at a customer that, you know, I was putting in SAM, and here we had offices in India, and China, and here, and everywhere, and it's just trying to manage, like, whoa, how do we really bring this process together and manage the data quality? So centralization was part of the answer. Now, you have some really cool tools that you could leverage to implement this. You know, HP Asset Manager is one of them, right? Everyone knows ServiceNow. You know, Alteris metering, so when you install software, when you reclaim it, when you retire it, right? This is one tool that you could use to do that. If you're on the service side, you could leverage something like Blade Logic. And to make sure that you have all your assets in a single place, then you need a CMDB of some sort. And HP is just one of them. I'm just listing things. And from an ERP perspective, you have PeopleSoft. So from a summary perspective, it's like, really, when you go to implement IT service management in an organization, this is a change management initiative. Would we agree? Right, because basically most IT people think that is a technology initiative, and it's not, because basically the business is impacted by it. Make sure the organization is engaged in all levels. Get that executive sponsorship. It's really, really important at some point. You may start organically, but eventually you need to leapfrog up so that he could be someone who could help you across the board. Because as you walk into different business channels in the organization, you will find resistance. Why do I have to do this? I have enough work. Go away. Bye. Right? Well, if you have a good executive sponsor, he'll be able to really walk around some of that resistance and build relationships for you. Keep the process simple. I just looked at 4 simple things, right? Easy to remember. I could evaluate, I could strategize, I could orchestrate, I could deliver, and do continual improvement. Keep it simple. Because basically, eventually, you want to make sure that that language is transferable into the business as well. You want to make sure that, so what's going on with your evaluate process? And how's strategize going? That is something that people could really get in touch with. And know your core competency, right? If SAM is not your expertise, if ITSM is not your expertise, go hire a consultant. Bring them in to just do that part of the work. Use your project managers, use your internal people to help you do that. But go get the people that you need so you can solve the problem. Because if you try to do it by yourself in-house, the chances are you're going to fail. And failure is not a bad thing because you learn from failure, right? But you want to be successful, and that's the goal. And make sure that you market and educate everyone in your organization about your process. And to conclude, if you have any questions, please ask your neighbor because I'm done. Thank you.